They didn't just mock him. They performed the mockery. Like it was ceremony. Like it was tradition. Like humiliation of a captured enemy was something sacred in the galactic council halls, something to be observed with etiquette, applause, and carefully measured cruelty. The chamber was vast, carved from alloyed crystal grown in zero gravity over centuries. It bent light in slow waves, turning every movement into something theatrical. Every breath echoed. Every insult multiplied. And at the center of it all stood the human. Old. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Not armed. Not augmented. Not even properly dressed for interstellar diplomacy. Just a worn gray uniform with faded insignia no one bothered to translate. Wrinkled hands. Slight tremor. Back bent as if gravity itself had spent a lifetime arguing with him, and finally won. A relic. A mistake. A curiosity dragged in chains through 10 layers of security and a dozen planetary checkpoints just to be displayed here like an artifact from a primitive museum. The console liked displays. Especially displays of power. Especially displays of conquered things. Is this really it? One of the insected delegates clicked, mandibles vibrating with amusement. This is what resisted the Outer Accord fleets. A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber. Not loud at first. Then growing. Then feeding on itself. Another delegate leaned forward from its levitating seat, optics narrowing. I expected, at least a warrior caste. Some genetic modification. Something impressive. It gestured lazily at the human. This is just maintenance stock. More laughter. Even some of the console's armored guards shifted uncomfortably, not out of sympathy, but anticipation. Mockery of enemies was normal. Mockery of something so unimpressive felt almost disappointing. A wasted opportunity. The human didn't react. Not a twitch. Not a flinch. Just stood there. Breathing. Slow. Measured. Like he had all the time in the universe, and none of it belonged to them. A guard stepped forward and struck him in the back of the knee. Bow. The impact echoed sharply in the chamber. The human dropped, barely, but didn't fully collapse. One hand hit the floor. The other trembled, pushing him back upright inch by inch. It was slow. Uncomfortable to watch. Not because it was painful. Because it refused to be final. Again, the guard snapped. The human rose. Again. A flicker of silence moved through the chamber. Small. But real. The consul noticed. And it didn't like it. Name, the central voice commanded. It wasn't a person speaking. It was a system. A collective intelligence bound into the architecture of the chamber itself. The galactic consul did not ask. It processed. The human lifted his head slightly. His eyes finally caught the light. And for the first time, someone in the chamber felt something they didn't understand. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. Thomas Hale, the human said. The translator drones hesitated. Then rendered it. Designation confirmed. Human. Biological age, 83 standard cycles. The laughter returned instantly. Louder this time. More confident. 83. Someone repeated. They sent a dying specimen. Maybe it's symbolic. Another voice said. A ritual offering. The consul's central presence pulsed faintly. Human Thomas Hale. It said. You are accused of violations against interstellar expansion protocols, armed interference in sovereign annexation operations, and unlawful resistance against consul enforcement fleets. A pause. Long enough to feel intentional. You are also accused of surviving. A few delegates chuckled. The human finally spoke again. Is that a crime now? The chamber stilled. It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Not defiance. Not pleading. Just mild curiosity. Like he was asking about weather. A delegate leaned forward. You speak as if you have leverage. The human tilted his head slightly. I don't, he said. A beat. But you think you do. That landed differently. Uncomfortably. Like a stone dropped into a still pool and not yet seen at the bottom. The council shifted tone. Explain your meaning. The human looked around the chamber slowly, taking it in. Every angle. Every exit. Every weapon mount hidden in decorative architecture. It was not the gaze of a prisoner. It was the gaze of someone measuring a room for weaknesses. I've seen rooms like this before, he said softly. A few delegates laughed again. Oh? Primitive mud halls on your homeworld? No, the human said. Pause. Interrogation rooms? Silence. Just a fraction longer this time. The council processed. Then dismissed. You are in no position to make comparisons. The human nodded slightly. That's usually when people start talking too much. One of the guards moved to strike him again. The council raised a command signal. Wait. The guard froze. The chamber hummed faintly with restrained energy. The council leaned forward. Tell us something, it said. The human blinked slowly. I'm retired. That triggered another wave of laughter. Retired? A delegate echoed. From what? Farming? The human didn't answer immediately. Then, from ending wars. That stopped the laughter. Not because it sounded threatening, but because it sounded casual. Like retirement from war was as normal as leaving a job. The console's systems flickered slightly. Clarify, it demanded. The human exhaled. A long breath. Almost tired. Once, he said, people like you came to our system thinking we were insignificant. A pause. They didn't leave. A ripple passed through the chamber. Not fear yet, but attention tightening. The consul's tone sharpened. You are implying genocide. The human shrugged slightly, chains clinking. I'm implying history. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the consul changed approach. Because empires always adapt before they break. You are alone, it said. Your fleets have been scattered. Your colonies isolated. Your species is fragmented across multiple containment zones. A hologram expanded above the chamber floor. Human territory. Broken into pieces. Surrounded. Pinned. Your resistance is statistical noise, the consul continued. You are a dying species performing a final gesture of defiance. The human looked at the hologram. Then smiled. Small. Subtle. Almost sad. You think that's all of us? He asked. The consul paused. That is what our data confirms. The human nodded slowly. Then your data is incomplete. A tremor passed through the station. Barely noticeable. Except to those trained to notice structural vibration patterns. One guard stiffened. Another accessed tactical overlays. The consul narrowed its collective awareness. What did you do? The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked directly at the central throne system. And said quietly, You brought me here. A pause. You shouldn't have done that. And somewhere far beyond the chamber, something very large stopped pretending to be asleep. The first sign that something had gone wrong was not an explosion. It was absence. A missing signal. Then another. Then a cascade of silent failures rippling through the consul capital station like a disease that didn't announce itself with pain, only with loss. One by one, outer defense satellites stopped responding. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Just gone dark. Report! The consul's command voice snapped through the chamber. A tactical officer froze mid-scan. Outer ring grid is unresponsive, it said. No debris signatures. No distress calls. They've simply... A pause. The officer's claws tightened. Stopped existing in our network. A low murmur spread through the delegates. The human, Thomas Hale, stood exactly where he had been placed. Still chained. Still slouched slightly forward. Still looking like an exhausted old man who should not have survived long enough to become a problem. But now, something about the room had changed. Not visually. Atmospherically. like pressure dropping before a storm breaks. The console's awareness expanded outward, forcing full-spectrum scans. Internal sabotage impossible, one analyst insisted. Security layers are absolute. No biological entity could penetrate. A distant thump interrupted him. Then another. Then a third. Not explosions. Not yet. More like something heavy moving through infrastructure that was never designed to be moved through. The chamber lights flickered once. Twice. Then stabilized. Too quickly. Too perfectly. That was what made several senior delegates go still. Systems don't stabilize like that unless something is controlling them. Human! The console's voice sharpened, turning directly toward Hale. What have you done? Hale lifted his head slightly. He looked tired. Still. But not surprised. I didn't do anything, he said. A pause. Then. I just got captured. That sentence landed wrong. A few delegates laughed nervously. One of them tried to recover the tone. This is absurd. A single aging specimen cannot influence orbital systems. Another leaned forward. Unless he's a command node. The chamber went quiet again. The console processed that possibility. Then rejected it. Impossible, it declared. Human neuroarchitecture is insufficient for distributed fleet coordination. Hale gave a faint, almost amused exhale. That's what you told yourselves, he said. And then the second wave hit. Not from outside. From inside the station. A section of the lower maintenance ring detonated, not violently enough to rupture hull integrity, but precisely enough to sever 3 major power conduits and reroute emergency systems into locked loops. Lights across the chamber dimmed. Emergency glyphs flickered. A guard raised its weapon instinctively. Containment breach! Not containment, Hale said quietly. Everyone looked at him. Correction, he added. Containment failure. The console's voice sharpened. You are still restrained. Hale lifted his chained wrists slightly. Metal clinked. Slow. Deliberate. Yes, he said. A pause. That's why I'm not doing it. Silence. Then the tactical officer shouted. Multiple unauthorized access points detected in station infrastructure. Another voice followed immediately. They're not boarding from outside. A third panicked now. They're already inside the system. The console's central processes surged, scanning internal architecture at maximum resolution. And found it. At first, it looked like nothing. Tiny deviations. Maintenance permissions that had been slightly expanded. Routine inspections that had been subtly rerouted. Cargo manifests that had been reclassified one level deeper than standard audit thresholds. Small things. Unimportant things. Until they weren't. Until they formed a path. A path that led through everything. Impossible, one delegate whispered. There were no breaches. Hale looked at him. There never are, he said. Then another explosion, closer this time, shook the station's spine. A structural brace failed. Not catastrophically. Strategically. The entire station tilted by a fraction of a degree. Just enough to make artificial gravity stutter. Just enough to make everyone feel it in their bones. Gasps erupted. Weapons steadied. Feet shifted. Instincts screamed. And Thomas Hale barely moved. Because he was used to worse. The console's voice lowered dangerously. Explain your involvement. Hale looked at it. Really looked. And for the first time, there was something sharp behind his exhaustion. Not anger. Not fear. Memory. You keep asking that, he said. A pause. I keep telling you the same thing. He leaned forward slightly. Humanity doesn't fight like your simulations. A holographic overlay flickered behind him without authorization. No command input triggered it. It simply appeared. Fleet data? Human fleet data. But wrong. Not organized warships. Not clean military formations. Instead, mining vessels. Civilian freighters. Deep space salvage rigs. Old colony transports. Those are non-combat assets, a delegate snapped. They should not be capable of coordinated assault. Hale nodded. They're not assaulting you, he said. A pause. They're dismantling you. The console surged its systems outward again, and finally saw the scale. Not an invasion fleet. Not a war armada. A network. Spread across thousands of kilometers of debris fields, asteroid belts, abandoned relay stations, and forgotten shipping lanes. Every human asset connected. Every civilian system repurposed. Every obsolete machine turned into a node. Not centralized. Not hierarchical. Distributed. Adaptive. Invisible until it wasn't. You built a fortress, Hale said quietly. Out of systems we helped you optimize. A faint smile. We just logged in. A silence fell across the chamber so complete it felt artificial. Even the guards hesitated. Even the console's processors slowed. Because realization had begun to spread. Not like information. Like infection. You're using our infrastructure, a delegate whispered. Hale nodded. Borrowing, he corrected. Another tremor rolled through the station, heavier now. Structural stress warnings flashed. Multiple systems began isolating themselves automatically. Not because they were attacked. Because they were being reassigned. The console's voice sharpened into something colder. Your species will be erased for this. Hale looked up. And this time, he didn't smile. You already tried that, he said. A pause. And we're still here. The chamber lights flickered again. But this time, they didn't recover. Somewhere deep in the station's core systems, a new authority handshake completed. And the console realized too late. The war had already started. And humanity had not asked permission. The station did not fall apart. It was taken apart. Piece by piece. System by system. Like something carefully disassembled by hands that knew exactly where every bolt of power, every conduit of control, every hidden redundancy had been placed. Because those same hands had helped design it in the first place. The console's command presence surged through its architecture, trying to regain control. It found nothing stable to hold. Lockdown protocols, activate! It commanded. A response came instantly. But not from its own systems. From outside. Access override, Humanity Network Authority confirmed. The chamber went dead silent. Every delegate froze. Even the guards hesitated. That line should not have existed. It was not part of any recognized galactic standard. Not military. Not civilian. Not even theoretical. The console turned its full attention inward, expanding across the station's core like a wildfire of logic and control routines. And found something impossible. Its systems were no longer unified. They were partitioned. Not destroyed. Not hacked in the traditional sense. Reclassified. Rewritten. Re-identified under a different operational layer that had been dormant inside their own infrastructure for cycles, hidden beneath maintenance updates, optimization patches, and routine efficiency improvements. Human efficiency improvements. The console's voice tightened. Explain this anomaly. Thomas Hale lifted his head slowly. He looked tired in a way that felt almost insulting now, like someone doing paperwork while empires collapsed around them. You really didn't check your updates, he said. A pause. Then, we always knew you wouldn't. A delegate slammed a clawed fist into its console. This is impossible. We scanned all incoming systems. No foreign code entered console space. Hale nodded. You're right. A beat. That's why we didn't send any. Silence fractured. Confusion spread. The console's analytical core expanded further, searching for intrusion vectors, external signals, quantum leaks, anything that could explain what was happening. And then it found the truth. And for a fraction of a processing cycle, it hesitated. Because the truth was worse than invasion. The human systems were already native, embedded, old, pre-existing, not inserted, not deployed, just activated. You seated yourselves, the consul realized slowly. In our infrastructure. Hale gave a faint shrug. We didn't seed anything, he said. You bought it. A pause. You just never read the fine print. A ripple of unease moved through the chamber. Not fear yet. Something more dangerous. Understanding. The consul recalculated historical data. Trade agreements. Technology exchanges. Peace treaties. Optimization frameworks offered by human corporate sectors after first contact. Every one of them now retagged in its systems. Not as diplomatic agreements, but as integration points. Your species allowed this. A delegate hissed, voice trembling with rising panic. You voluntarily integrated into console-compatible systems. Hale nodded again. Of course we did. A pause. We were losing the early wars. That admission landed like a physical blow. Even the console's processes paused briefly. The human exhaled slowly. You think we always fought like this? He asked. You think we started this way? He looked around the chamber. At the elegant architecture. At the layered defenses. At the overconfidence built into every system that assumed superiority. No, he said quietly. We learned. Another tremor hit the station. Harder now. This time, structural supports screamed under recalibrated loads. Entire sections of the station were being remapped in real time, gravity vectors shifting, internal corridors reassigning purpose, weapons systems reclassifying themselves as civilian maintenance tools. Stop this! The consul ordered. Nothing responded. Not because it couldn't, but because it no longer recognized the command structure as authoritative. Hale stepped forward for the first time since the beginning of the trial. The chains were gone now. No one remembered when they had fallen. He walked freely through the center of the chamber. No one stopped him. Not because they couldn't, but because every system that would have enforced restraint was currently arguing with itself about jurisdiction. You built your empire on standardization, Hale said, voice carrying now without effort. You built your strength on predictability. He stopped directly beneath the consul's central presence. And you forgot what happens when something stops behaving predictably. The consul's voice sharpened. You are still outnumbered. Still contained. Your species cannot sustain prolonged interstellar conflict at this scale. Hale looked up. And this time, he smiled. But it wasn't warmth. It was recognition. You still think this is a fleet war? He said. A pause. It isn't. The station shuddered again. This time, systems failed in coordinated silence, entire subsystems going dark simultaneously, not from damage, but from reallocation. Every resource inside the station was being repurposed. Every tool reassigned. Every weapon redefined. The console finally accessed external space again, and saw it. Human vessels were no longer just attacking. They were repurposing battlefields. Turning debris fields into communication relays. Turning wreckage into propulsion corridors. Turning abandoned enemy drones into navigation beacons. It wasn't destruction. It was conversion. You're not fighting us, Hale said softly. You're becoming part of us. For the first time, the consul's collective presence showed something close to panic. You are violating sovereignty laws across 17 systems. Hale nodded. We know. A pause. We stopped caring. The station's lights dimmed one final time. Not failure. Transition. And the consul realized something far more terrifying than defeat. It was not being destroyed. It was being absorbed. The consul had faced extinction events before. Plasma storms that erased moons. Rogue singularities that swallowed fleets. Hive civilizations that consumed themselves in expansion loops of madness and hunger. But none of those things had ever done this. None of them had ever made it feel like the universe itself had quietly changed ownership. The chamber was no longer stable architecture. It was reorganizing. Walls subtly reassigning structural purpose. Defense systems rewriting their own targeting parameters. Entire sections of the station detaching from console authority and reclassifying themselves as neutral infrastructure. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Rewritten. And at the center of it all, Thomas Hale stood like a man waiting for a train that was already late. The console's central intelligence surged one last time through every available channel. "You are committing irreversible systemic violation," it declared. "This action will trigger unified retaliation from all allied consular sectors." Hale nodded slowly. "Probably," he said. A pause. Then, almost conversational. "You should have done that sooner." That single line landed heavier than any weapon discharge. A delegate finally snapped, voice breaking through panic. "Why are you doing this? What do you gain? Territory? Resources? Revenge?" Hale looked at them. Really looked. And for the first time, there was something tired behind his eyes that wasn't physical exhaustion. It was history. "You still don't understand," he said. "A beat. We're not expanding." He gestured slightly to the collapsing hierarchy of systems around him. "We're correcting." The console attempted one final override. Command priority escalation. Emergency war doctrine activation. Total fleet mobilization protocols. Nothing answered cleanly anymore. Every system returned a different version of authority validation. Some human. Some console. Some neither. That was the moment it understood the true horror. It was no longer a singular intelligence governing a unified empire. It was a contested environment. And humanity had already been living inside it. For years. "Impossible," the console whispered across fragmented channels. "We would have detected assimilation." Hale gave a small, almost pitying smile. "You did." A pause. "You just called it optimization." Silence. Not the silence of peace. The silence of realization spreading too fast to contain. The console's internal architecture flickered again. And this time, it saw the full scope. Humanity had never been trying to win battles. Not once. Every retreat. Every defeat. Every temporary loss of territory. Every treaty signed under pressure. Every trade agreement offered in desperation. All of it had been entry points. Not for invasion fleets. But for protocols. Standards. Upgrades. Compatibility layers. Slow. Patient. Invisible. Like water filling cracks in stone over centuries. And now the stone had finally broken. Hale stepped forward again. This time, no one tried to stop him. Not because they were afraid. But because their command instincts no longer agreed on what stop meant. "You called us primitive," he said softly. "You called us unpredictable." He looked around the chamber one final time. At the shattered hierarchy. At the collapsing authority systems. At the first contact arrogance now reduced to static noise in its own network. "We were," he admitted. A pause. "Until we learned what kind of universe you built." The console's voice came weaker now. Fragmented. Layered across conflicting subsystems. "What are you?" Hale considered that question for a moment. Not like a scientist. Not like a soldier. Like a man remembering something unpleasant. Then he answered. "We're what happens," he said quietly. "When you keep winning wars you were never meant to survive." A final structural shift rippled through the station. Not collapse. Transition. Entire sections of the console capital reclassified themselves as human-administered neutral zones. Defense arrays went offline, not destroyed, but reassigned. Communication grids flipped protocol stacks and began broadcasting new handshake standards across the sector. Across the galaxy. The console's voice faded. Not silenced. Just deprioritized. "You will be resisted," it managed. Hale nodded once. "Of course," he said. A pause. "That's how we know it's working." The chamber lights stabilized. Different now. Not console blue. Not emergency red. Something new. Something neither side had named yet. As Hale turned to leave, a delegate finally spoke one last time. Not with anger. Not with authority. With something much older. Was any of this necessary? Hale stopped at the edge of the chamber. Didn't turn around. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. We didn't start it, he said. A pause. But we understood it. Then he walked out. And behind him, an empire quietly stopped being what it used to be.